Dear viewers from around the globe, the time has never been more ripe than now to consider the importance of technology, global impact, and culture. What do we need to focus on to be prepared for the future? Well, our first speaker has the answers for you, but also he'll have some questions for you. So do get ready to get your answers into the chat. Joining us live from the USA, it's my pleasure to welcome Be Radical co-founder and futurist, Pascal Finette. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I am excited to be taking you all on a little bit of a trip into the future. And the future, as Oliver already said, is on one hand, of course, incredibly exciting. It's also a little weird. So we're going to do this super interactively. So my ask for you is open the chat, which is on the right-hand side. You see the little speech bubbles. And I will ask you a whole bunch of questions, and I will use the chat to break the wall, the fourth wall between all of us. So Andrea, great statement. Oliver Bending, stay with Ukraine. I'm there with you. And that being said, let's bring up my slides and let's get into it, because we have lots of ground to cover. There's lots to talk about the future, and I want to take you on that ride. So with that being said, again, open the chat. We use the chat, throw questions, comments, etc. into the chat. Make sure that everybody can see them, so we have a global conversation here. And I will, in between, will ask you a couple questions, so be ready. Now, that being said, let's talk about the future. It's a weird world we're living in. And to get us started, I want to bring up a fairly prominent hedge fund investor, a gentleman called Jorge Paulo Lemann. He's the co-founder of 3G Capital, one of the largest hedge funds in the world, out of Brazil. And I give Jorge a lot of credit, because at the Milken conference, in front of running cameras, he admitted to being a dinosaur. We've been living in this world of old brands, nothing changes very much. You could focus on just being okay. But that isn't true anymore, because now we're being disrupted in all ways. And I think that's just a very, very accurate statement of the future. Now, we want to talk about the future. And I want to give you a bunch of tools and frameworks to make sense of the future. And to get us started, I want to do a little bit of a reframing, and I want to do a quick check-in with you. When you see the following sentence stump, the part of a sentence, the future is blank. Do me a favor, throw into chat, what is the first word which comes to your mind when you see that sentence? The future is, what is it for you? Is it exciting, bright, crazy? I'm just curious, throw it into chat. I want to see what is the future for you. And as you're mulling this over, you might think about, the future is like, you might already see probably different versions of the future emerging for you. Like you might think about, well, the future could be, as Charlene said, sustainable. Svenja, exciting, bright here. Angie, open. Christian, the future is complex. Absolutely. We have a few folks here who say the future is uncertain, clearly in today's times. Peter, the future is complicated. Jörg, the future is always changing. Exactly. Here's what I offer you as a first step, as a reframing of how to think about the future. Because we believe the future is what we like to call a paradox. Because the future is all of the things you say. The future is at the same time exciting and crazy today and now and all the good things. And clearly, as we can see at the moment, with the situation in, for example, the Ukraine, the future is also scary and unknown and, uncertain. So that being true, also, the future is unknown. That is, in many ways, the beauty of the future. Every single time, every single day you wake up, you get a chance to redefine the future, to create the future for yourself. You don't know what the future is. And by the way, when you ever see a futurist telling you they know what the future is, they're lying. You don't know. Now, that being said, at the same time, because it is a paradox, particularly when you look at technology, you realize you can actually do predict the future, at least somewhat. And here's how I would like you to think about the future going forward. Think about the future as a expanding timeline. And you are somewhere where that little dot is, the today. And of course, there's a future you have in a day, in a week, in a month, in a year from now. And if you think about that expanding timeline, what many of us do is we think of the future as a continuation of the past. We believe that there is something we like to call the official future, a future, singular. Now, when you look and think about the future, what you realize is that the future really is an expanding cone of probable futures, surrounded by an even bigger cone of possible futures. And I believe our role as leaders, and we're all leaders, is to identify what are the upper and the lower boundaries of these cones. What are the upper and the lower boundaries of the possible futures? And then within that, the probable futures. And then it is on us to create the future we want to see, something we like to call our preferred future. Because there is a multitude of futures, nearly unlimited. So think about the future not as a future, but a set of futures. And we're invited to create that future, which I think is the beauty of it. So with that being said, let's look into the future and turn all of you in the next about, 20 minutes, 25 minutes into what we like to call a practical futurist. Arm you with the tools and the frameworks to become a futurist, but not just a futurist, but a practical one who can actually apply these things to their lives and their companies and their businesses. And for that, everything you need to know, we can summarize in a single slide. And you have seen that single slide a million times, so I will not bore you all that much with it. Because of course, particularly when it comes to technology, and Oliver already mentioned this beautifully, the future is exponential. Think about computers. Moore's Law, Gordon Moore, co-founder of Intel, about 50 years ago, predicted that computers are getting twice as fast every 2 years, a classic exponential trend. Now we see this in many other industries as well. Oliver already alluded to this. Artificial intelligence, augmented and virtual reality, blockchain, Bitcoin, whatever you want to take. Now, again, I don't need to bore you with this because you know this. By now, you definitely do. But I want to point something out, because if you are somewhere where this gentleman stands here, and I would argue that in many technologies, we are at this interesting inflection point of the curves, where the curves really haven't fully taken off. Think about, the potential of like something like the blockchain, for example, or even artificial intelligence. So if you're standing where this gentleman stands, and you look to the past, and the past is your only point of reference, the only thing we know for sure, the past has a tendency to look flat and linear. If you have the ability to see the future and realize that the future is exponential, you realize that the future looks very, very, very different. Now, this is beautifully summarized. Our position in this particular world is beautifully summarized by a quote by Ernest Hemingway. Yes, Christian, you got 100 points. You got Hemingway right, because of course my little stick figure here is Ernest Hemingway. Ernest Hemingway wrote a book called The Sun Also Rises. And in this book, he has a quote, which of course we take completely out of context, but it's a beautiful reminder. We like to call this the Hemingway law of motion. And the shortest version of that quote is gradually and then suddenly. Because that's exactly how we're feeling in this world. That's exactly how technology happens to us. Oliver talked about, Windows CE, if you remember that. Like, it was terrible. It was like really not there yet. It wasn't the smartphone. Until suddenly, in 2007, Steve Jobs gets on stage, shows you the iPhone, you realize, oh my God, the world has changed. And that's exactly how this feels. Now, I want to do a tiny little bit of an experiment with you. What you see here is the time we spent on social media. Digital media. So digital media. The red bars, mobile phones, blue, PC laptops, white ones, other internet connected devices, your smart television, etc. This is data, US data. It's very consistent around the globe. 2008, 2018, 11 years worth of data. I don't need to tell you that mobile phones have taken over the world, clearly. We know that. What I want to do with you is a little bit of an experiment. Let's see if you get the reference here. Imagine I bring out the DeLorean. The DeLorean is washed, waxed, the flux capacitor is charged to the brim. And you and I were sitting in the DeLorean, and instead of going to the future, we go to the past. And we go to the year 2008. Now, the problem is, while we are going back, we lose all our memories. So we don't have the benefit of hindsight, because clearly hindsight is always 20/20 vision. We also don't have any other data source other than the slide you're currently staring at. And now my question for you is, in the year 2008, looking at only this graph, would you have said that mobile phones or smartphones are taking over the world? I am pretty sure you wouldn't. I would clearly not, because look at the red bar. The red bar is tiny. It's about the size of other internet connected devices. Clearly it hasn't taken off yet. So now imagine the following scenario. Same setup. We're in our DeLorean. We have no other point of reference and we have no memories. The question for you is now, in which year would you have said mobile is going to take over the world? In which year do you see the explosion of mobile really happen? Throw it into chat. Just toss into chat the year. There's no right or wrong, by the way, here. You can't, get anything wrong. You might not get anything right as well. I'm just curious, toss it into chat. I'm very curious to hear which year would you have said, again, not taking other information sources into account, in which year would you have said mobile is going to take over the world? And again, I've run this exercise a million times. 2035, Rustam, that probably is a little further out there. But we see here, Rhonda 2012, Christian 2011, Angie 2011, John 2013. So we've run this exercise hundreds of times. I've done this with high schoolers all the way up to Fortune 500 CEOs. And the median response is pretty much exactly what you're just tossing into chat, which is 2012-ish, somewhere around that topic. And of course, it makes sense, right? Because 2012 is the year where mobiles are really taking off, the red bar is getting a bit juicier. It feels like it's really happening. And by the way, Pete, who wrote before David, before 2008, if you would have told me 2008, based on this chart, I want to see your personal investment record because you must be the oracle. The joking aside, here's the important bit. So again, most of us would have said 2012. I would have said 2012 as well, based on this chart. Now here's fascinating insight. When you look at when some of the most relevant internet companies were born, which leverage mobile at their very core, which were built on the idea of mobile, it's super fascinating. Airbnb founded 2008, Uber 2009, WhatsApp 2009, Instagram 2009, Insta 2010 actually. And this is very consistent around the world, not just American companies, it's all over the world. Now here's the thing. We would have missed these companies not by 3 months or 6 months, we would have missed them by 3 years. And that's the reason why I think it's so incredibly important that we become good at reading the early part of the exponential curve. Dieter talks about ubiquitous computing. Yes, in 2006, that is the early part of the exponential curve. So you want to start becoming good at reading what the futurist Amy Webb likes to call weak signals, or as the historian Fernand Braudel likes to call the thin wisps of tomorrow. And as Rob Walker points out, that there really is no shortcut. There are no algorithms. And if all you're doing is tracking what everybody else is tracking, all you're seeing what everybody else is already seeing. So to discover, you have to dig. And I want to give you one example and walk you through how you think about digging. How do you actually do digging? And here goes. And let's talk about computers, because computers really are the mother of all exponential trends. Now, I will not tell you that your smartphone is computationally as powerful as a supercomputer from the 70s, blah, blah, blah. You heard all these stories, very boring. Much more interesting is this. At the beginning of the pandemic, so somewhere around 2020 in the summer, a computer hacker bought a digital pregnancy test. You can buy them in the United States for about $3 a piece. They're single-use devices. You use them once, they tell you if you're pregnant or not. Very similar to a COVID test. You throw them away. Digital, $3. And they started to dig. Because here's a good question you can ask if you want to dig, which is, I wonder what's inside of that thing. So the computer hacker went out, bought one. It's not particularly expensive, $3, took it apart. What they found inside of it is rather interesting. there's a normal pregnancy test in there, the one with the 2 lines. You have a little sensor reading those 2 lines. The data is sent off to a little computer, which is powered by battery and shows you on a display if you're pregnant or not. Now, the first question you might ask is, why would you even do that if it's the same thing? The response, of course, is it's more convenient. It's also a high stress environment. People get confused if you're pregnant, if there's 1 or 2 lines. You might know this from the COVID test eventually. So it kind of makes sense to have a computer which says, you're pregnant, yes or no. Then the computer hacker asked themselves a second question. And this goes to what Dieter already mentioned regarding ubiquitous computing, because clearly this is a computer. We don't think about it as a computer. We use it, we throw it away, we toss it into the trash can. So the question the computer hacker asked of this device is, how expensive is the chip on this device and how powerful is it? And this is where it gets interesting. The chip on this device, and I say this one last time, $3 device. So the chip can't be that expensive. The chip on this device is $30 and has the same compute power as the original IBM PC. So now I have a $30 which I literally pee on and throw away, which has the same compute power as the very device which powered the empire of Microsoft ultimately, which gave us Word and Excel. And of course, because we're computer hackers and we have a little bit of fun with this stuff, we put the computer game Doom on there. So the next time you're waiting for your pregnancy test results, you can play a round of Doom. I'm not quite sure what that says about humanity, but there goes. Now, you might look at this and say, this is funny. You might look at this and say, well, this is, we've come a long way. But here's a fascinating thing. When you think about the world of computing, what we've realized is that computers used to be roomfuls of electronics. They were mainframe computers. And then we made them smaller, as Oliver already mentioned in the beginning. We made them so small that they became eventually mini computers, the size of a fridge. And then we made them smaller and they became desktops. And then we made them smaller and they became laptops. And we made them smaller and they became handheld devices. So every single time we made them smaller, which is really fascinating, the world changed a little bit. And then we made them, of course, smaller, and we made them what we like to call, or my friend Alan Wurfs-Brock likes to call, ambient. Because now we don't even think about them as computers anymore. They're just there. And this is where the world gets really fascinating, because we know that every single time we went from one compute era to the next, the world changed. Not just a little bit. The world changed really dramatically. And not just the world, but the companies which dominated that world changed. Mainframes dominated by IBM. PCs clearly dominated by Microsoft. Your handheld devices dominated by Apple and Google. And now we're moving into this world which, again, to use a word which was used in the chat already, ubiquitous or ambient. The world will be dominated by, most likely, a different company, because I don't think Apple or Google are set up to give you billions of these little devices, which are, somewhat all interconnected, etc. So that's really fascinating. And of course, the moment you start looking, you start seeing these weak signals, these early indicators of change everywhere. The stuff you see here on this slide, there aren't even weak signals anymore. Like digital wallets is already like a thing. Electric vehicles clearly are taking over combustion engines. Space technology is on the rise. Genetics and modern day medicine brought us the COVID vaccine. So the world is changing in really fascinating, interesting ways. And just to give you a little bit more of an add-on to this, because I'm a technologist, I like to think about the world being changed through technology. But it is not just technology, but also our social interactions and the way we use technology. This gentleman here is a Chinese influencer. He goes by the nickname, the Lipstick Brother. He's a media sensation. He's on TikToks and the likes, so social media, has a lot of followers, and essentially produces cosmetic tutorials. So he's applying lipstick, mascara, etc. I think this is in itself already rather interesting, because clearly something has shifted in terms of gender fluidity. And we have a male protagonist touting what we used to think of as a female domain. But here is where it gets really interesting. In China, you've got something called Alibaba Singles Day. That's a bit like Black Friday in the US or Amazon Prime Day. So a single day, 24 hours, where a lot of products are discounted and people buy stuff online. our friend the Lipstick Brother went online at the last Alibaba Singles Day, which was towards the end of last year, and started selling 24 hours long in a live broadcast decorative cosmetics, a little bit like TV sales. And within 24 hours, the Lipstick Brothers sold a whopping $2 billion worth of merchandise. That is the world we're living in at the moment. And again, if you're in sales and marketing and in the consumer product world, you should ask yourself, what does it actually mean for me? Which gets me to the next part of what I want to talk to you about today, which is the interesting question of what are the implications? What are the implications of these interesting trends? And what many of us do is we tend to look at an implication, a signal, a change, and then we're pretty good at identifying what we like to call the first order implications. So the question of, if this is happening, what does this mean? And I want to invite you to do something differently. I want to invite you to step into the world of a futurist called Jerome Glenn, who invented a model, a framework to allow us, to show us and ask us to keep asking the question, what is the implication of the implication? So instead of just stopping, what most people do, at the first order implication, you go and ask yourself, if this is happening, what is the implication of that? And then keep asking yourself, what is the implication of that? Because what you'll find is that the really interesting disruptions happen at the outer edges of this, what tends to look like a mind map, if you do it visually. Let me give you a simple example. Let's talk about self-driving cars. Now, self-driving cars are nowhere near to be fully, there, but eventually we will get there. And the question then becomes what does change in the world when we have a lot of self-driving cars on the road? Now, let's do it. Of course, there's a whole bunch of first order implications, and I'm pretty sure most of you, all of you, can actually rattle down some. Like the shape of cities will change because these cars because they're better utilized, they need less parking spaces, yada, yada, yada. So the very shape of cities will change. Your behavioral will change. And these are just a few examples, right? Because you're not driving anymore. So you're being chauffeured. So you don't have to pay attention. And now you can ask yourself, if my behavior changes, what does this actually mean? And I can tell you that if you happen to be a beer brewer, for example, you should be very happy about self-driving cars because the person in the car can be drunk. It's a fascinating world. Now, the world of logistics will change. So you heard of the trucker shortage, for example, in the United Kingdom after they had their Brexit happening. That might change. And hopefully we will see less accidents because, cars, these self-driving cars, they pay more attention to the road. They're not distracted. They don't text while they're driving, or they can actually text while they're driving because they don't care. So accidents will be lower. Again, everybody can do this. That's not the magic. The magic is when you start double clicking on it and you say, okay, what does happen in a world where we have less accidents due to self-driving cars? And this is where it gets more interesting, because now you realize, well, injuries and death will go down. I think that's a pretty amazing outcome for all of us. You will have topics like you will have less car repairs. You've got less fender benders because these cars, clearly less accidents, less car repairs. Something will happen to insurance claims because clearly less accidents, less insurance claims. And lastly, just to pull out one more here, you will have less traffic violations because the cars will obey the rule of law. Now, again, you want to double click on this and you ask yourself again, what does it actually mean if we live in a world where we have less traffic violations, for example? And this is where it gets super interesting because remember, we are asking the question, what is the implication of the implication of the implication? And in a world of less traffic violations, you will realize that if you happen to be a municipality, your revenue will go down. I grew up originally in the city of Cologne, and I can tell you every November, December is the end of the fiscal year, every November the police was out in force to pick up people who were driving just a tiny bit too fast so that we can make up for lost revenue. That might not be in the future. Another one, and this is particularly true, unfortunately, in the United States, where I now live and reside, we tend to pull over, but predominantly people of minorities, color, black people, for example, and we tend to punish them harder than, you know, the average white person. So we have a racial bias in traffic violation citations. If that doesn't happen anymore because we don't pull you over anymore, hopefully we will see less incarcerations, less people being put into jail for things which are kind of silly. So that is one. Let's play this out. Let's ask again, like the question, what is the implication of the implication? So in a world where you'll have less insurance claims, your insurance rates should go down. So clearly you should pay less for car insurance because the risk pools are shifting. They're getting less risky. And also your competition, if you are an insurance company, your competition might rise because we will definitely see new entrants building new insurance products based on these new risk pools. Playing this out on the side of less fender benders. If your uncle runs a car repair shop, now might be a good time for him to sell the company. Because if you have less fender benders, you have less accidents. If you run a car repair shop, you might have less to do, way less. And we will see probably more bankruptcies in this field. On the second side, on the flip side of that, and this I think is a great thing, it's like the product life of these products will increase. Like the product life of a car will increase because we will have less cars which get totaled in a car accident. And here's where it gets really fascinating. Let's talk about the world where you have less injuries and death. So one thing which happens is that if you happen to be a private hospital, particularly in the United States, you realize you make a lot of money in your emergency room. And in a world where you make a lot of money in your emergency room, you want to look at who are the people who come into your emergency room. And you realize a lot of the people who come into your emergency room were unfortunately people who were involved in traffic accidents. So if we see less traffic accidents, your revenue might go down. But now it gets really weird. Because in a world where you have, remember, self-driving cars leading to less accidents and injuries and death, meaning in a world where we have less people dying on the road, which I think we can all agree to is universally amazing, you will also realize that this world has less organ donors. The Red Cross pointed this out to us. The vast amount of organ donors, unfortunately, are young kids driving themselves to death. And as someone from the Red Cross said to me, in a world where we have self-driving cars, we have a massive organ shortage, even above the levels we have today. So my invitation for you is to think about the future, identify the weak signals, that was the first part, and then really think through what are the implications of the implication. Doing this in this essentially graphic manner, which looks a lot like a mind map. And we do this regularly with our clients, and you can do it as a quick and dirty, just as we did now, or you can do it as a very extensive, elaborate mind map where you really think through what are the implications, because the insight is always this. The really interesting stuff happens not at the core, not at the stuff everybody can see, but as Rob Walker mentioned, at the stuff where you have to dig, and that is the outer edges of this map. Now, with all of that being said, this all leads us to a world where we will see a lot of signals. These are the early indicators of change, the weak signals. And those signals, they level up towards trends. And those trends then level up towards drivers. And there's, of course, interplay between the two sides of it. And again, this is what is important to understand. Everybody can see drivers. These are the big mega trends, like stuff like aging population. Many of us can see trends because that's what you read in the trends reports about and in the magazines. Few of us can actually see the signals. And that is what I invite you to do, to look out for. Now, let me close us out with a last piece of content, because all of this leads to disruption. And I want to give you a different model, a different way to think about disruption. And for me, this journey into disruption starts with the earliest definition we could find for the word disruption 500 years ago. Disruption was defined as a rending asunder, a bursting apart, a forcible separation into parts. And I think it's a very good, a very accurate description. And when we talk about disruption, we love to talk about three companies: Kodak, Nokia, and Blockbuster, or Blockbuster in the middle here. And if you're anything like me, if you hear these stories, and I'm sure you heard those stories, if you're anything like me, if you hear those stories just one more time, you just want to just throw up in your mouth a little bit, because the story is always the same. Kodak invented the digital camera, ultimately got defeated by, stuff like Instagram. Our friends from Blockbuster dominated the world of rental video and got destroyed by Netflix. Nokia, the king of the phone, got destroyed by Apple and Google. It's fascinating because we have an obsession to look at the disruptors. We love to look at the Netflixes and ask ourselves, what can we learn from Netflix? And my invitation for you is to change this a little bit, because we're missing a bigger part of the story, which is this. The underlying job to be done, the thing we hire a product or service for us to do, has in all of these cases actually never changed. Think about it. You're still taking pictures. You're taking way more pictures than ever before. They just don't happen to be on a film anymore. You're still watching movies at home. They just don't come on a VHS video cassette, which you get from a store. You're still listening and holding a phone like a thing to your face to communicate. It just looks a little different. So we invite you to think about disruption as what we like to call a state change. A state change comes out of the world of physics. It's a physical concept where, if you take, for example, water, in its frozen form, it's ice, it's solid. You warm it, it becomes liquid, water. You warm it further and eventually it becomes vapor, a gas. In between that, you have what is called the state change. And the reason why we think this model maps so well is twofold. One, the underlying molecule, H2O, water, has never actually changed. That's our job to be done. The second one is, when you look at state changes, you realize that state changes don't happen in a perfectly nice, gradual, linear fashion. They happen to be on these slightly janky exponential curves. And this is where it maps. Because in any industry, you're always in a particular state right now. And at the beginning of that state, there's always stability. This is where if you are the incumbent, nobody can defeat you. You build the moat around your castle. And then you see the gradual changes towards another way, a better way of fulfilling the customer need emerge. This is where the weak signals start to play. And these weak signals eventually, gradually turn into what we like to call a strong signal. They become loud and powerful. And then suddenly the state changes. And state changes are hard to navigate for incumbents, for existing companies. Let me give you an example. Let's talk briefly about Blockbuster. And the reason I like to talk about Blockbuster is because we can relate, not because I want to make fun of these guys. Here's the state Blockbuster was in. Blockbuster ran stores where you could rent a VHS video cassette, which you then brought home and watched. At the height of the Blockbuster empire, Blockbuster had some like 6,000 stores all around the United States. What is important to understand about Blockbuster is that Blockbuster is not a, entertainment company per se. It's a real estate company. Blockbuster knew better than anyone else where to place a store, how to merchandise the store, how closely do you correlate these stores to each other, et cetera, et cetera. So Blockbuster became extremely, extremely good at this. And then the state changed. And we went from VHS video cassettes to DVDs. And when you look at a DVD, you realize you can put it into an envelope and you can ship it to your customer. So your customer doesn't need to come into your store anymore. It becomes much more convenient. Of course, that's the founding story of Netflix. But the important bit here is this. When you look at Netflix, when they ship DVDs, you realize that they are not a real estate company or an entertainment company. They're a mail order company. And this is what's really important to understand when you go from one state to the next, because your existing skills and processes become irrelevant. Your existing skills and processes become irrelevant. It doesn't matter that you know how to run a store if all you need to do is mail order. And that's really hard to navigate. And of course, the state changed once more. We went to streaming. Now your existing skills and processes are all about running server farms and digital media, etc. So hard to navigate. The really only reason why Netflix could navigate this so well is because Reed Hastings, the CEO of Netflix, knew that the DVD is only an in-between state, that the end game was to become a streaming company. Let me end with a quote. This year is a dear friend of mine, Ron Shaich. Ron is the founder of a healthy fast food chain here in the United States called Panera Bread, sold the company for a massive multiple over what you would normally get. And I asked him, how did you do this? How did you create a company? And Panera is well known for being a digital first company. They were very early in all of these technologies. And he said something profound to me, which summarizes our time together really beautifully. He said to me, Pascal, our approach at Panera has always been to discover today what will matter tomorrow, and then to transform our company into a future that is unfolding before us. My friends, that is exactly what we have to do. We have to figure out what matters today, what matters tomorrow, and then create that chart, this pathway towards our preferred future. And that is all I had for you today. You are now officially certified practical futurists. And I want to get back into the studio because we have a bit of conversation to be done. And I'm curious what the questions will be from Tanya.
Pascal, thank you so much for your very thought-provoking and entertaining presentation. I'm delighted that Oliver is here with me in the studio so I can pick both of your brains. So the first question for you, Pascal, is what are your top tips for technology investments for companies for this year?
Well, quite frankly, given the unfortunate situation we're in, I would invest into cybersecurity without a doubt. I do think that the changing workforce we have seen emerge in 2020 towards now is not just going to stay with us. I do believe that we are in the early stages of that transformation. So I would heavily invest into figuring out how do I actually empower my workforce in this new hybrid weird world, which, to be frank, we still don't know what it will really shape up to. And then my third thing I would pick is pick any technology you're interested in, any technology you think would be beneficial for your company, AI, blockchain, whatever it is, and start making some investments and start figuring out how you best use this. So those are like the top 3 things I would do today: cybersecurity, changing workforce, and supporting your workforce here. And figuring out, which technology might be interesting for your business.
Okay, thanks, Pascal. Oliver, do you agree, or would you add anything to that?
Yes, of course. But first of all, Pascal, a great presentation. Thank you very much. You're missing the view, by the way. I'm not sure if you get this, right? It's amazing here in Frankfurt. So actually, Pascal could do the sales pitch, for us. Thank you very much for that, Pascal. So, but seriously, of course, we are in service management and managing infrastructure. So I would highly recommend to invest in that to better enable digital work and to drive digital transformation projects. So service management, infrastructure automation, and especially this notion of AI. I will talk also in my presentation about it. In our market, it's called AI Ops, artificial intelligence operations. So I call it always the super automation of ticking boxes of your checklist so that you don't need to think about it anymore in managing infrastructure. And of course, security is a big thing. It should be part of an overall workspace and service management strategy.
You've made a recent acquisition in cybersecurity. What can you tell the customers about that?
Yeah, so we have done a couple of acquisitions. One was a few years ago regarding cybersecurity, which we have implemented in the platform because we see security as part of a broader story, right, to secure in the workspace. But one thing that we also touch on during this conference is, unfortunately, security is a lot of times in the way. It creates this clumsy experience. So when you look at end users, how they consume work, how they want to get stuff from IT through self-service portals and so on, it's super important that security is built in by design. But again, the experience edge is the important topic here.
Okay. Pascal, so you talk about change being exponential with new technologies, and that curve is rising steeply. But what do you suggest to companies? Should they focus on new technologies or more on their employees and organizational structures? I know it's a mean question because it's an either-or question, and maybe you don't agree with that way of analyzing it.
You need to do both, yes. But I think there's a bunch to unpack here, and probably in the interest of time, let me just give you the kind of like the cliff notes of it, the short version of it. I do think you need to keep an eye out on technology. I do think that you need to distinguish between what are technologies you can use today, which give you a competitive advantage. Think about topics like robotic process automation, RPA, for example. It's definitely something you want to, any company really should invest into. Versus what are technologies which are more on the edge, stuff you want to probably play with, but not make big investments into. Let's say, for example, like the fabled metaverse, which to this day we actually don't know what it actually is, but there might be something to it. So you want to make that investment. But then really it comes down to people. As Herb Kelleher, the co-founder of Southwest Airlines, big airline here in the United States, once said, the business of business is people, yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And that's, I think, is ultimately true. And also understanding that if you want to shift, if you want to change, your company, the only thing you can actually change is people. Organizations just adapt. So invest into your people and make sure that, your people are your asset. That is what it comes down to. And ultimately, your people are also the people who are doing the tech stuff for you, with you. So again, my invitation for you is really think people first, because that is truly the essence of your business. And then in terms of technology, really suss out what is the technology which is real today, what is now, what's coming down the pike, which you have high confidence in, the next. And then really think a little bit about and invest a little bit into the beyond, but that's really more experimentation and getting familiar with stuff, because often I think it is important that you actually play with technology to really understand it. It's one thing to talk about, say, for example, virtual reality. It's a whole different thing to put on a headset and try it out.
Okay, thanks, Pascal. So we often talk about companies as if they're clean slates and they're all startups, but of course they're not. And I think a lot of your customers have a legacy system as well. So what are the different kinds of challenges that a legacy company faces in comparison to a startup?
Yeah, I think it's a good point, because innovation is at the core of every business, right? And especially in IT, the world is moving fast. And sometimes we forget a little bit when we talk about all this innovation that there's also business and customers and some legacy that we have out there. So we all focus then on the startups, and they don't have to take care of legacy because they don't have a history. But the reality is you need to address both, right? And what we share with customers and where we consult customers to, that you need to separate this actually in three kind of horizons. We pitched the model by McKinsey, the 3-horizon model, quite often. Horizon 1, where you have to work on topics and products and services that are here and now important this year. Then horizon number 2, what's important maybe in 24 to 36 months. And then even horizon 3, what I call the crazy guys. So you have to have a group of people that thinks beyond what's on the horizon. And where does Matrix42 fit in? So we are actually helping to running the business, things that you have on your horizon 1 and horizon 2 as a business in IT, that you can take this off your ticking list, that the infrastructure and the service management and the processes are just running, so that you can also have people that can work on something else. AI is a good example. So why do you invest in AI? Of course, you want better automation, more smartness, higher productivity, more happy users. But ideally, it takes your workload off IT and maybe also some of your employees, and then you can invest it more into the future. So that's the reason why I say innovation needs to be by design in an organization and not by incident. So that's the reason why I highly encourage these 3-horizon model.
Okay, Oliver touched upon AI. Pascal, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. Now, CEOs are concerned about integrating automated business processes with artificial intelligence. You often talk about the purpose of such transformations. What would you say to CEOs who are worried about that transformation, what the purpose of that transformation is?
Well, I think it always comes down to how do you actually fulfill your customer need in the best possible way, right? And this goes back to the state changes model we debated and talked a little bit about, like understanding that there's an underlying customer's need, and these are incredibly durable over very long periods of time. And then the question becomes, how do I fulfill that need in the best possible way, most efficiently, most effectively, et cetera? And clearly, today we're standing at a point where in many industries, topics like robotic process automation, artificial intelligence are emerging as possible answers to that question. So that's my starting point. And then a question you get often asked, if you have conscious CEOs who are thinking about their workforce, they say, well, will this leave me with the challenge that I might have unemployment, that I have people who are, I make obsolete by using artificial intelligence. And I think the important piece here to understand is, and Oliver already mentioned this, is I think it's less a question of reducing your workforce. It's much more a question of taking, repetitive work, which quite frankly nobody really likes to do, is like filing a piece of paper is really not a good use of a human's time. So taking that, freeing up the time and having the humans work on the things we are particularly good at as humans, like have them do customer interactions, be in the empathetic world, be creative, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really, for me, is an interesting question for a CEO is how do I take the mundane out of the work and put as much as I possibly can using technology to solve for this? And how do I then free up my workforce to do the higher level, more interesting work? And we already talked about, and Oliver, I love the 3 horizon model. Have them work on stuff in horizon 2 and 3. Explore what the future can look like, and really have a lot of the processes in horizon 1, which are repetitive and can lend themselves perfectly to AI and RPA, have these pieces being done by machines.
Okay, Pascal. Oliver, what would you say to these CEOs when they're integrating automated business processes with AI? What are the metrics that they should be looking at?
Yeah, I have to say, I don't like this conversation about, AI is the holy grail, and then I reduce workforce and I can save costs, because I see it like Pascal. It actually provides you the ability to free up time. I mean, Gartner called this many years ago, focusing on building the business rather than running the business. And where AI helps you is running the business automatically, self-driving, So I think what's important here is really the productivity score and the experience score. I will share that in my presentation. Experience it's all about it, because sometimes we forget, maybe last comment about this, why are we doing all of this? Why are we investing in all of this, all these technologies? It's not because we want to play with technology. It's because the users, the employees in an organization, they should become more productive and have more fun at work, and actually, be more productive. Yeah?
Okay. Pascal, Matrix42 customers might find this hard to believe, but in the digital transformation report for 2021, one of the factors that came out was that actually when digital transformation forces are constantly forcing technology upgrades, 20% of the companies experience this, that some of the workforce gets anxiety and builds up a resistant culture. What would you say to companies to encourage the digital-first culture?
I'm not surprised, quite frankly, because it's a very human tendency to dislike change. We actually don't like change. Like, we are hardwired to not like change. And I think what is important for leaders who want to establish change and a change culture, et cetera, is you need to do, I believe, 2 things. The one is you need to actually give me a vision for why should I change, like the promised land. Right? The idea of like, what is that future look like? Remember, we talked about the preferred future. You need to show me the preferred future, and you need to make it salient for me. I need to want it. So that gives me the motivation as an employee to actually move towards this future. But that doesn't get me to move. I think that the second piece to that is twofold. One is you need to give me the skills and the tools to actually go into that future, which I think is important to do. It's like, you can't just say, we move into this future and figure it out for yourself. And the second one is because humans, again, like, we don't like to change unless we have to. And that gets us to the second part of the coin. On one end, you need to see the promised land. I need to see the vision of what the future could be. But there's also, I need to have a little bit of a discomfort in my current situation so that I do understand that I have to change, that there is a, quote unquote, the burning platform. Because, even if I see, for many of us, even if we see the promised land, we know this, from our own world. Like, think about going to the gym. You should go to the gym. It's good for you. But, unless there's a good reason for you, or you're very self-motivated, you don't. So you need to create that good reason. So there is a little bit of a back and a forth, like a positive energy and a little bit of a negative energy, as in we have to do these things.
Okay, thanks, Pascal. One final question, Oliver, because Pascal is encouraging us to be practical futurists. Now, without a spoiler alert, with your presentation, can you give us a quick overview of the innovations in technology you see over the next 5 to 10 years? We haven't really spoken about the metaverse or NFTs yet.
Yeah, I mean, 5 years in IT is a big time frame, so
Yeah.
it's like looking into a crystal ball. But I'm with Pascal. I mean, we see technologies now on the horizon that have a big impact on our market as well in service management. And the metaverse, augmented reality, virtual reality, also John will talk about it from the Lenovo perspective. There are new devices now coming up that need, again, management and security, you know, and you can incorporate it into your service management processes when something goes wrong. I have also a little use case in my presentation I will share. That's definitely something to watch. I mean, I can echo again, AI, ML, we can use all the buzzwords, but frankly, it becomes reality, you know, so it creates value and benefits for our customers, and that's the reason why we have implemented it also in our platform.
Okay, I look forward to your presentation, Oliver. Thank you. Pascal, thank you so much for joining the digital workforce this year and for helping to celebrate Matrix42's anniversary. It's been a pleasure to talk to you today.